The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries filled the air as Cristiano Ronaldo sat at his usual corner table, a spot that had become his quiet refuge in the heart of the city. The early morning light spilled through the windows, casting soft shadows on the polished wooden floor. He took a sip of his espresso, his gaze drifting through the bustling cafe. The hum of conversation and the clinking of cups created a familiar rhythm, but something suddenly disrupted the harmony. A young waitress emerged from the owner's office, her head bowed, shoulders trembling. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to hide her distress, but it was impossible to ignore. She wiped at her eyes hastily as though she could erase the sadness before anyone noticed. But Ronaldo did. He had seen too many struggles in his life to overlook pain when it unfolded right before him. He turned to another waitress, a middle-aged woman who had always served him with a warm smile. He asked her what had happened. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at the heartbroken woman who was gathering her belongings with unsteady hands. "It's Monica. She just got fired." The waitress sighed, her voice laced with frustration and sadness. The owner said she was late too many times, but it's not really her fault. She hesitated for a moment, glancing toward Monica, who was now hunched over, trying to steady her trembling hands as she packed up her things. "She's a single mother, you know. Her husband died last year in a car accident, a hit and run. One night, he went out to grab medicine for their little boy who had a fever and never made it back home. The police never found the driver. Since then, she's been doing everything she can to keep her kids fed and housed." The waitress shook her head, her eyes dark with empathy. "She works back-to-back shifts, sometimes double shifts, just to cover rent, groceries and school fees. And when the cafe closes, she doesn't go home to rest. She picks up night shifts at a cleaning company, scrubbing office floors when most people are asleep. She barely gets 3 hours of sleep on some nights. I don't even know how she manages. And yet, despite all that, she still comes in every morning, forces a smile and does her job." Her voice softened as she watched Monica wipe her eyes with the sleeve of her worn-out uniform. "Some mornings she runs late because her 6-year-old daughter refuses to let go of her, crying for her not to leave, or because she's up all night comforting her 10-year-old son, who still has nightmares about the night his father never came home. But the owner doesn't care. He warned her before, said rules are rules, and today, he finally had enough and let her go." Ronaldo felt a tightening in his chest. He had grown up knowing hardship, watching his mother make sacrifices to keep their family afloat. He understood what it meant to struggle, to fight for survival when the odds were stacked against you. And now, here was a mother, dismissed without mercy, left to face an even harsher reality. He watched as she stuffed her apron into her bag, brushing away more tears. Her hands trembled, her body slumped under the weight of exhaustion and despair. She had probably spent the last few weeks running on fumes, trying to be both mother and provider, sacrificing sleep, sanity, and maybe even hope. And now, with one stroke of a pen, her world had been turned upside down. He couldn't just sit there. He couldn't watch someone drown in sorrow when he had the means to help. Setting his cup down, he rose from his chair and approached her. "Monica, I heard what happened. I'm really sorry," he said gently. The woman looked up, startled, her red-rimmed eyes widening when she recognized him. For a moment, she seemed to forget her misery. It wasn't every day that Cristiano Ronaldo stood before you, speaking your name as if you mattered. "Mr. Ronaldo?" she stammered, shaking her head. "It's nothing, really. I'll find something else. I always do." "You don't have to do this alone," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a card. "This is my manager's number. Call him tomorrow. I want to help." Monica hesitated, staring at the card as though it were made of gold. "I can't accept charity," she whispered. "It's not charity," Ronaldo replied. "It's just one human helping another." With that, he stood up and walked away, leaving Monica to regain her composure. The next morning, Ronaldo picked up his phone, expecting good news. He dialed his manager, hopeful that Monica had reached out, but the response was disappointing. "She hasn't called," his manager said. Ronaldo frowned. Maybe she just needed more time. A day passed, then 2, then a full week. Still, nothing. He couldn't shake the feeling that she wouldn't call at all. But why? Was she too proud? Too afraid? Or had life beaten her down so much that she no longer believed in miracles? Determined to find her, he returned to the cafe seeking answers. "Does anyone know where she lives?" he asked the staff. The waitress who had first told him Monica's story shook her head. She never talked much about her personal life. She comes, works, and leaves. That's it. Even attempts to call her went unanswered. It was as if she had vanished, swallowed by the weight of her struggles. But Ronaldo wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not when he knew she needed help more than ever. That's when he decided to look for her. He wasn't sure where to start, but he refused to let her slip through the cracks of misfortune. Ronaldo began asking around. Neighbours, local shopkeepers, even the cafe's delivery drivers. Anyone who might have a clue about where Monica lived. Most shook their heads, offering only sympathetic glances. He drove through the nearby streets, scanning apartment buildings and modest homes, wondering if one of them held the woman who had unknowingly captured his concern. After days of searching, he found himself outside a rundown housing complex on the outskirts of the city. It was the kind of place where people lived not because they wanted to, but because they had no other choice. He spotted a group of children playing soccer with a tattered ball, their laughter a stark contrast to the bleak surroundings. One of them reminded him of himself as a child, barefoot, relentless, fueled by a love for the game despite having so little. He approached them with a smile. "Do any of you know a lady named Monica?" A boy with tousled brown hair looked up. "That's my mum," he said, his voice cautious but curious. Ronaldo crouched down to his level. "Can you take me to her?" The boy hesitated before nodding. He led Ronaldo up a narrow staircase to a small, dimly lit apartment. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, Monica was hunched over the kitchen counter, staring at a pile of unpaid bills. Her face was lined with exhaustion, her shoulders heavy with the burden of survival. "Monica!" Ronaldo called gently. She turned, startled, her breath catching in her throat as she saw him standing in her tiny home. "Mr. Ronaldo? What are you doing here?" she whispered in disbelief. He smiled warmly. "I have a proposal for you." Her heart pounded. "A proposal?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid the moment might vanish like a fleeting dream. Ronaldo nodded. "I want to help you get back on your feet," he said, his tone steady and reassuring. "I've spoken to a few people, and there's an opportunity for you at a hotel not far from here. It's a stable job, better hours, better pay, no more night shifts, no more choosing between work and your children." Monica's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the worn kitchen counter. It felt surreal, like a cruel joke fate might snatch away at any second. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," Ronaldo urged, his voice gentle yet firm. "You deserve a fresh start." Tears welled in Monica's eyes, but for the first time in a long while, they weren't from exhaustion or despair. They were from something unfamiliar. Hope. Days later, she started the job, and for the first time in years, she was able to be there for bedtime stories, goodnight kisses, and early morning giggles. The crushing weight of uncertainty slowly lifted from her shoulders. But Ronaldo wasn't done yet. One bright Saturday morning, he invited Monica and her children to a small gathering. She arrived expecting nothing more than a simple thank you meal. But when she saw what awaited her, her knees buckled. Before her stood a fully furnished apartment, warm, inviting, a place that felt like home. The first year's rent already paid. "Cristiano," she whispered, shaking her head, overwhelmed. "I can't accept this." He smiled, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Yes, you can," he said. "You've spent so long fighting for your children. Now, it's time for someone to fight for you." Tears streamed down her face as her children ran into Ronaldo's arms, their laughter filling the space that had once been empty. For the first time in years, Monica felt something she had nearly forgotten. She felt safe. She felt free. And all because one man, who had already conquered the world, had taken a moment to change hers.